When the Philadelphia 76ers made the blockbuster trade that would send James Harden to their roster in exchange for Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and Ben Simmons, as well as 2 first-round picks, this was viewed by many as a trade that would put the Sixers over the top in winning a championship. Not only were they able to get off of Ben Simmons' bad contract, who was refusing to play anyway, but they were getting a superstar in return that they could put alongside their already superstar and franchise player in Joel Embiid. The bromance relationship between Daryl Morey and James Harden was reunited once again from all those years they had together in Houston, a marriage and relationship that would never seem to end, until it did. The Sixers made the trade for James Harden in February 2022, and just 1.5 years later, Harden is already asking out, citing that he has no desire to play for the Sixers. And to make matters worse, we now have learned that while the Sixers were initially exploring trade options to send Harden where he wanted to go to get some value in return for a player that doesn't even want to play for them, it's now being reported that the Sixers have ended trade talks to move James Harden and plan to bring him back for training camp to hopefully start the season, even despite the fact that Harden remains adamant that he will not play for the Sixers and does not plan to report for training camp. The story just gets weirder and weirder. The breakup of James Harden and Daryl Morey that we never thought would come has happened, and it's going to be especially awkward and uncomfortable as the Sixers begin training camp. But where did this relationship go awry? And what does this mean for James Harden's future, as well as for the future of the Philadelphia 76ers, who are on the clock before their franchise player in Joel Embiid starts becoming disgruntled and demands a trade himself? Well, that's what we'll be talking about in this video. Of course, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, I want to focus more on the relationship between Sixers executive Daryl Morey and James Harden, because some people have been asking, why would James Harden, who literally just was traded to this team, wanted to go to the Sixers, especially after Morey accepted the job to become the team's president of basketball operations in November of 2020, shortly before the start of the 2021 season. Why would he so quickly look to get traded? Well, it starts with Daryl Morey. Now, Daryl Morey and his path to becoming an NBA executive was very unconventional in that Morey, unlike most GMs and executives in the NBA, did not come from a basketball background. Morey was very much a stats nerd that focused more on the advanced analytics side of basketball and using formulas and metrics based on past data that would result in the best possible outcome to win. When the Houston Rockets hired Morey to become their GM in 2007, he was the first GM of his kind to be hired without a traditional basketball background. There was something about his stats-based approach that intrigued the Rockets owners at the time to consider taking a different approach on their team, similar to the Oakland Athletics of the early 2000s and the historic Moneyball method that focused purely on statistics as a means to win games, with the philosophy of signing players who could get on base more than anything else. For Daryl Morey, his philosophy and ultimate method for increasing a team's probability of winning in basketball was favoring three-point shooting and layups, or shots in and around the basket within 3 feet, over things like mid-range jumpers. He also favors the ability of being able to get to the foul line to receive free throws. Efficient shots, shot selection, and focusing on players who specialize in those areas were his dream, and he found that in James Harden when he decided to make the trade for him in 2012 from the Oklahoma City Thunder. James Harden possessed all of the skills and qualities that were Morey's cup of tea: high volume, efficient three-point shooter, but also possessed the slashing ability and quickness to beat his defender off the dribble, to get to the paint and draw fouls. While I think a lot of us find Harden's game boring and annoying when operating in isolation on most possessions and stopping the overall pace of a game by getting to the foul line what seemed like 20 times per game, didn't really make for exciting basketball. But it worked for him. Harden would of course go on to be a superstar that we now know of him, became an MVP and arguably one of the greatest scorers the game has seen, as well as one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time. Daryl Morey loved James Harden's game so much that he once said that it's factual that Harden is a better scorer than Michael Jordan, and that he would prefer Harden's offense over MJ's. It's one of the wildest takes you'll see, but Morey truly believes this, and it's why when Morey took over as the president of basketball operations for the Sixers, literally the one day after his last day with the Houston Rockets, he wanted to get his guy back, even after trading him to the Nets so the Rockets could start a rebuild. Now, we all know what happened with the Sixers in that first season with Morey at the helm. They hired Doc Rivers, they end up finishing with the best record in the East, and look poised to be one of the top contenders for a title that season, until the epic collapse in the second round against the Atlanta Hawks, where Ben Simmons was scared shitless to shoot the ball. Of course, after that embarrassing series, Simmons says he's never going to play for the Sixers again, refused to report for training camp, until he realized he wouldn't get paid, so then pivoted to having mental health struggles that would prevent him from playing, and the Sixers knew they had to get rid of this guy. The market wasn't going to be great for him because he was a big contract with a lot of years left on his deal, great defender but couldn't shoot whatsoever, something we know Morey doesn't like if you're too afraid to even shoot a three-pointer as a guard. And Morey knew this was his opportunity to get James back, even if it meant giving up some future assets to make it happen, and sure enough, he did. Right before the trade deadline in 2022, Harden was moved to the Sixers and Morey and James embraced in their first meeting after the trade. But you know what was odd about this trade was that, at the time of it, Harden was in the 4th year of his 5-year max deal that he initially signed with Houston Rockets, and the expectation was that he would be extended because he was extension eligible for a longer term deal at that time. But for some reason, the Sixers conveniently missed the deadline to extend him to a longer term deal, but they said, you know what, don't worry about it. Obviously, we traded you for a reason. We want you. We're going to take care of you and ensure you're here for the long term. So instead, Harden declined his player option for the final year of his deal at $47.4 million, a lot of money to turn down, but doing so to sign a longer-term deal with more guaranteed money. But turns out that longer-term deal was just 2 years, $68 million, less annually, going to him from $47 million to an average annual salary of $34 million between both years. And the thought behind this was, hey, Harden's going to take a discount. We know he's a superstar. We know he can get max level money, but he's doing this for the betterment of the team and helping us to win a championship and giving us more cap flexibility to round out the roster, especially after the Sixers lost yet again in the second round, this time to Miami Heat, losing to a player they once had on their team in Jimmy Butler and prioritized Tobias Harris and Ben Simmons over him. Now, of course, this is complete speculation on my part, but you have to think James Harden didn't really want to take that short-term 2-year deal at a discount. I mean, we all know James Harden is one of those guys in the league that is more in it for himself and what benefits him. It's why you're seeing him just hop around from team to team and demanding trades when things don't go his way. But I'm sure he reluctantly signed that deal with likely an informal promise that we'll give you a player option on the 2nd year so you can decline it and get paid to make up for taking this 1-year discount, because I'm sure for the Sixers, they were pretty confident that they were going to win the title or come close to it, which would convince James Harden that he made the right decision and now he's going to be rewarded for it. But of course, the Sixers had another disastrous playoffs in which they blew another series lead, where they had a 3-2 lead and a chance to finish off the Celtics in Philadelphia, but would go on to lose the next 2 games and would leave the Sixers without having even advanced to a conference final since trusting the process. And yeah, no star is going to like that. They want to know that they took a discount for a reason, taking a pay cut to cement their legacy by winning a title. Players don't care if they take less money if it means winning a chip. But when it doesn't go the way that you had planned, well, that's when resentment and frustration builds. And so when the expectation was that Harden would decline his player option and get the max level money he was looking for, or felt that he was owed anyway, Morey said, well, about that, we're not quite sure you're worth a max contract, which, to be fair, he's right. Harden is not the same player that he used to be back from his days in Houston. He's going to be 34 years old by the time the season starts. He has 1,000 games under his belt, still a great player, still an all-star, but giving him a max contract at his age, and especially when you see that his game hasn't really helped when it comes to winning, yeah, that's kind of front office malpractice, which I think Morey knows, and no matter how good of friends they are, this isn't going to change his thinking on that. And of course, that pissed Harden off. He exercises his player option to force the Sixers to give him that money and then proceeds to demand a trade with the threat of trade me or I'll walk in free agency next year. Now, I think most people assume, well, Harden will likely get moved in the coming weeks after he made those trade demands, and I'm sure maybe the Sixers did as well, but what likely happened is they realized the market for Harden isn't that high because teams are going to be unwilling to pay him the max for a guy who has shown no sense of loyalty over the last few years and will leave at the time of a hat if things don't go his way, and will push his way out by overeating and not caring at all about the team. And teams are also going to be unwilling to give up a ton of assets to get James Harden, which we know the Sixers are going to be looking for and obtaining max value for him. Because in their view, it's James Harden and he commands a high asking price in a trade. but it likely got to the point where the Sixers saw they would have to give up pennies on the dollar to trade James. And they know by doing so, meaning trading James Harden, they won't be able to be as competitive. And by not being as competitive, it means you're now running the risk of Embiid becoming unhappy and potentially losing him down the line, which would eventually lead to a blow up and rebuild of the roster and the end of the process as we know it. And so the reality here is that Harden actually has all the leverage because we've seen it before, he'll start throwing games. He'll push his way out to get what he wants. He knows that the Sixers know that they won't be able to trade Harden for a player as good as him. He knows the Sixers are desperate to try and keep their championship hopes and win now window alive, and he knows they'll eventually have to settle for what he wants. They can make threats that they're ending trade talks and that they expect him to report to camp, but he has the power to really throw off their season if they don't move him, and it's why Morey should have never let this situation escalate to the point and where we see it is today. Morey, smart man, stats genius, but that doesn't always translate to making the best business decisions, and he really messed up on this one and now has to figure out a way to fix it. Do you guys think Harden will eventually come around and play this season for the Sixers? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.